Um, Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the next session of Virtual Global Spine. I'm your host, Jonathan Rasouli. I think you all know me by now. We've been doing this for about 4 years. And this is part two of my last lecture about a month ago, talking about how to navigate your path from resident to fellow to attending, and then attendingship and beyond in your long and excellent career in spinal surgery. I myself am pretty fresh out from fellowship. I did my residency at Mount Sinai Hospital. I started in 2012 and I finished in 2019. And I did my fellowship at the Cleveland Clinic and worked there a year as an attending before I joined with Northwell Health, where I'm currently at, and I'm currently practicing as a neurosurgery spine attending. The bulk of my practice, as you can imagine, is primarily spinal surgery. So I do bread and butter spine. I also do a lot of complex spine revision, basically anything related to the spinal axis, I'll do. But one of the things that I've noticed, especially when I was a late resident, so let's say chief resident and a fellow, was, I'd ask some of my senior residents, I'd ask some of my attendings I closely trusted, people who I consider mentors. I'll ask them a lot of advice on, what should I do? Where should I go for fellowship? How do I get a job? What do I do? What's a 401k? How do I invest? I got so much advice, and um, and so much of it was so varied, so different. And what I wanted to do, the goal of my last talk, which you can at this point see on YouTube, but I'll kind of summarize it now, is kind of distill down that volume of information I got and all the anecdotal, a lot of it's anecdotal, right? And distill that down and kind of give you what are the key things and key takeaway points for you to kind of get a very nice and very fulfilling and most importantly, a very happy career in spine surgery. So you very get easy with the pressures of today's society, increasing pressures from the healthcare systems on us. It's easy to get burned out. Burnout is a real thing. And I think that when you are happy in your career, in your life, you have much less of a chance of getting burned out, and you wake up every day very happy with the decisions that you made. And with that, one of the questions I always ask myself, and people often ask me, is like, what's a spine surgeon? What makes your journey different from everyone else? And I kind of give that in quotation marks because we as a discipline are very unique, right? Where so many different people can call themselves spine uh, practitioners, right? From neurosurgeons to orthopedic surgeons to pain doctors to PAs to NPs to physical therapists to chiropractors. I mean, there's so many people that work on the spine. And what makes us different from everyone else is a lot of things. Obviously, is a lot of things, but there are a few key things that I wanted to kind of hone in on. So I wanted to start a little bit with my initial talk, and then we'll go into kind of the questions I got after that talk. I got a lot of really good questions through Twitter. Some people emailed me, and although I emailed them back, I felt they were just such good questions. I had to I felt that it was necessary to have a part two to this. So okay, so the residencies, they're very similar. Orthopedic surgery is a little bit shorter because of the nature of the training. They go into fellowship much sooner as well too. The main difference between them is that the exposure to spine can be variable based on program. Basically, every program now has some sort of spine exposure, but it may not be required in orthopedics. And it may be difficult to get exposure early in your residency. It may something may happen later in your residency, like in your fourth and fifth year, versus neurosurgery, like day one, you're doing spine cases with the attendings over there. So you get more consistent, more predictable exposure to spine and neurosurgery versus orthopedics. It's a little bit unpredictable. That's not to say that the training is any much different. It's just that if you go to a program that's known to be spine heavy, you're going to get that exposure. It'll be more predictable. But if it's not like that, it's more focused on sports medicine of joints or trauma, you may not be able to get that exposure as easily. Board certification also happens right around the same time for both of us as well too. It's a little bit more specialty specific for orthopedic surgery. So I would say that, I get this question a lot, and I actually had this question there. Like, so which route should I choose? I've always wanted to do spine. Should I do? It seems like ortho makes the most sense because I could get a little bit less training, and I don't have to worry about all the other stuff in neurosurgery, and I can just do spine from day one. I would say that um, if you have no interest in neurosurgery at all, like you really are purely a spine person, then probably ortho is the best route. If you're not too sure yet, and by the way, that's a rare person. I don't know too many people who started off in my residency wanting to do spine and ended wanting to do spine. You always start with something different. It kind of changes by the time you graduate. Like I wanted to do functional neurosurgery. I was very interested in DBS and movement disorders, and I actually did an in-folded fellowship in functional and stereotactic neurosurgery. But now I'm a complex spine guy. Go figure, right? So I would say that within orthopedics and early in neurosurgery, you kind of want to let your tastes will change. And with that said, I think you should kind of gravitate to what you feel you'll be happiest in. Don't worry so much about the extra 2 years that it takes in neurosurgery, just what you feel you would be the happiest in. So definitely get exposure in both in your fourth year, like do a sub-I in neurosurgery, maybe do a sub-I in ortho, and then see what you like better, and then go with that in mind. Fellowships. So this in the fellowships route for neurosurgeons, let's say pure neurosurgery spine is a little bit different than applying to the orthopedic spine fellowships. The ortho spine fellowship, and it's all in the United States, by the way. Ortho spine fellowships are very organized. They're done through an online MAC system where you submit an application. It's just like applying to residencies. Like it's very organized. You have a personal statement. It's like applying to applying to med school, applying to residencies. You send out your application, you hear back from the program, you set up your dates, you go interview with a bunch of other applicants. And it's very organized, systematic. With neurosurgery fellowships, it's a little bit more off the books. So typically, your mentor in your residency or you yourself will email. And it's usually done with a single person. Like you're gonna shadow, let's say Dr. Shaffrey, for example, or you're gonna shadow Dr. Baj, for example. You email them. They kind of some people advocate for you, and you ideally get that spot as you set up a couple years in advance. So you have that program kind of picked out for you maybe 2-3 years before you graduate, and then you kind of matriculate into that once you graduate. It's a little bit less, it's more nebulous. It's not as clearly defined and standardized as the orthopedic spine fellowships are. All of them generally are about 1 year, and the focus of each fellowship will be varied based on the program. And you can just do your research, kind of look into the program, talk to some people, like which programs are the deformity programs, which programs are the MIS programs, which ones are like the bread and butter degen. I would say, because at this point you will have graduated from residency, right? And you obviously want to do spine, you're doing a fellowship, you kind of know what you want to do, right? I get a lot, and this is one of the questions I got. I'll talk about it a little bit, but people often ask, like, so what should I do? Should I do a deformity fellowship? Should I do MIS fellowship? Because I got a lot of degen experience in my residency. I want to do private practice, so maybe I should do MIS, or I get all these things. I would say that the main things you need to ask yourself in terms of where you want to go. Assuming you have a choice, right? Assuming you have a choice. Sometimes you don't have a choice, right? Assuming you have a choice, I would say you want to focus on a volume heavy program where you do tons of bread and butter degen, because that's going to be the bulk of your practice. You're going to do a lot of degen, a lot of ACDFs. You're going to do a lot of T-lifts. You're going to do a lot of just bread and butter spine, no matter where you go. By the end of your fellowship, you want to be really comfortable doing those cases. Like you want to be able to do that on your own, without a more experienced spine surgeon kind of watching over your shoulder. You want to be comfortable to that point by the time you finish fellowship. Ideally, by the time you finish residency. So by fellowship, you're kind of honing those skills. But in reality, you want to be very comfortable with bread and butter degen by the time you finish your fellowship. So like, if you're doing a lot of deformity, and I mean like real deformity, like major revision spine, PSOs, osteotomies, T4 to pelvis, kickstand rod, like the real deformity stuff, right? You're gonna get a lot of that in private practice. Okay, you're gonna get a lot of that. I mean, any practice that you go to, I see a lot of deformity in my practice, and I when I started fellowship, or excuse me, when I finished fellowship and when I was an attending, when I first started, I wanted to do like MIS. I was more of an MIS, endoscopic robotics guy, and now I'm like the exact opposite. I do a lot of open deformity, big wax, revision cases. That's like the bulk. That's about 40-50% of my practice. Um, if you had told me that when I had started, I would never believe you because I never, to be frankly honest, I never bought into that whole spectrum of thinking, But now, again, the pendulum has swung completely the opposite way. I'm like more of the open I'm open deformity guy rather than MIS stuff. So I would really say what it boils down to is your fellowship is you should do primarily DGen, okay? And then you should have some exposure to deformity, which is important. It's a very important skill set to have. You want to be able to be comfortable with those cases. You bring a lot of value to any practice you join after you graduate. If you're comfortable with deformity, if you're comfortable with trauma, especially trauma cases can be tricky. They can really be tricky because every trauma is different. You see all kinds of crazy things. If you're comfortable handling this stuff and like, okay, because multiple services are usually involved. You have general surgery, you have vascular surgery, you have neurosurgery. They may have, lower extremity, upper extremity, orthopedic injuries, multiple different services. Who goes when? What goes this? What goes that? If you're comfortable managing these cases, you actually bring a lot of value to a healthcare system. And if you have to cover a level 1 trauma center, you'll definitely be seeing trauma spine. So if you're comfortable knowing how to deal with these cases, you bring so much value to a system. Like they need to have you there. You have to bring some sort of value to the system. Otherwise, you're replaceable, which is another topic I'll talk about. Um, and the last part doesn't really matter. Okay, so I basically talked about all this stuff, right? Um, the things you kind of are not important are like super complex, intrinsic or primary tubers, chordoma of the spine, sacrectomies, this kind of stuff. Unless you're super hyper specialized in an high volume tertiary academic center where this is all you do, you're not going to see any of this in any other setting. So I personally don't think it's worth doing a fellowship in this. And also intradural stuff. Again, unless you should be comfortable with it, but that being said, these cases are super rare, and unless you want to be a very highly specialized person in a tertiary center, that's you're not really going to see this stuff in private practice or like your bread and butter academic practice. Let me take a little pause right here to see if there are any questions before I keep going. If you have any questions, go ahead and type them in the chat box. I'm going to get to the Q&A in just a little bit, but is there any questions right now? If not, that's okay. I'll keep going. All right, I don't see anything. If go ahead and type them in if you have any questions. I'll answer them as I keep going up. So, we already talked about most of this stuff, but with fellowships, the key thing here is you want to do a lot of volume. You want to do a lot of bread and butter. Your goal by the end of this fellowship is to be extremely comfortable doing these cases without attending behind your shoulder telling you what to do. Okay. Key. I would say, from my experience now, if I can give you some pearls, you want to know how to do freehand. Oh man, if you can do freehand pedicle screws in the lumbar and thoracic spine without nav, you will be so surprised how many places like don't have an arm or don't have nav, or to do nav is like some act of God. It's going to add 3.5 hours to your case. It's crazy. It just, I mean, and you think, okay, yes, I still want to, I don't care. I'll add 3.5 hours to my case. I'll add, but I want to do nav because I'm not comfortable doing freehand. Well, that's 3.5 hours you added to your case in a day. How are you going to get all your cases done, right? That magic, one of the things I never really realized, I mean, yeah, at some point I realized as a resident, but now I really feel as an attending, is the turnover from anesthesia and your staff. The day shift to the afternoon/evening shift is such a drastic difference in the quality and competency of the anesthesia team and the staff that you have to finish by like 3 or 4 p.m. You don't want to be there past that time because your staff like all of a sudden like it's amazing. Like at 2 p.m., you have a skilled scrub tech who knows everything. At 3 p.m., you have a scrub tech who doesn't even know what a kerosene is. You know what I'm saying? And it's like it's amazing or they don't know how to load a screw. So it's like a case is moving well, everything's going well, everything's going smooth. All of a sudden, it comes to a screeching halt at 3 p.m. And it gets even worse at night. So like your goal is to get as many cases done before 3 p.m., right? And then if you have to do some, late night, like after 3 p.m., I try to do like smaller cases, like a microdisc, laminectomy, things like that, that I know are pretty straightforward. I don't really need any specialized stuff, right? Again, another interesting thing that I will say about this is that you want to be like I like you want to be kind of a surgeon that's like not very needy and not like I hate to use this word, but you're kind of like a cheap surgeon, meaning you don't need so many things for a case. You just want to kind of quickly get it done. Like, oh, I need every case. I need an exoscope. I need a Zeem. I need a 3D spin before and after the case. I need gold tip pedicle screws. I need expandable TLIF. I need to use BMP for every case. I need to use every osteobiologic in the in the hospital for every case, right? These are not good things. Like people will notice, they're gonna put pressure on you. You're not gonna have as easy as a time as if you're kind of a straightforward, surgeon. Now that being said, like you should not like fine if you need to be an expensive surgeon, great, but it should not come at the expense of patient care. Like if whatever it takes to get that patient safely off the table is whatever you need to do. If it costs you $100 million, fine. If it costs you $10, obviously not realistic, but fine. It's better to kind of be. You don't want to be. You don't want a lot of eyeballs looking at you. Let's put it that way. All right. We talked a lot about a lot of this stuff in the last talk. I'm going to skip most of this stuff. I kind of, again, I'm getting a little bit bogged down here, but I want to talk a little about the Q&A. I got a lot of questions about your first job. A lot of questions about your first job. Let me maybe go over this once. The main things, and I got, okay, should I take the highest salary? I recently got married. My wife has family in this city. I want to stay here. Where should I go? Oh, this place has a great reputation, but this prior practice will give me a better lifestyle, or vice versa. Where should I go? I would say the major things you need to think about, and this is always held true to residency, it's held true to fellowship, it's held true to attendingship as well too. The main things, number one, first and foremost, is your family situation. Like, where are you going to be? Where are you, your spouse, and your kids going to be happiest and safest living, right? Because your mindset should not be, okay, I'm just going to stay here for like 1 or 2 years and then look for something better. That's not a good mindset because imagine you buy a house, your kids are in school, your spouse has a job. I mean, these are going to be very, very difficult things to uproot yourself and go somewhere else, right? Because we as surgeons, although it's difficult, we technically are eminently transportable. Yes, you're starting from scratch all over again. It takes a long time to build your practice, but you can do it. But your family, it's much more difficult for your family. It's not easy for them to do this. So your family situation is first and foremost, okay? Then the second would be location. Are you happy living where you are? Like, do you want to be in a more rural place, suburbs of a big city, or do you want to live in the city? And obviously pros and cons of both. Your partners who you're going to be working with, are they a cohesive unit? Do they work well together? Do they share well? Do they play in a sandbox well? Or are they like a wolf pack where they just kind of share expenses and help each other out a little bit, but in general they're all working separately. These are all going to affect your day-to-day, your happiness in your day-to-day job. Like I would suggest working with people that you like, right? I mean, yeah, let's say you're making a great salary, but if you don't trust your partners or you don't like your partners, it's not a good place to work, right? Or if it's like one partner is super malignant, everyone else is okay, but there's one that's super malignant, like that's just not a good situation. And then not as important, but also important is starting salary. Um, You'll be very surprised. A lot of attendings have, or a lot of mentors of mine told me that's the least important thing. I vehemently disagree. Your starting salary, right, is not as important as the other things I talked about, but it is in the top five things you need to think about. Why? Your starting salary is going to be the base for which every other contract is going to be built upon. Okay. Yes, it can go down. I mean, that's not good, right? But generally, you want to obviously try to get the best starting salary possible, right? In a place that is you're happy working, you have good partners, and you're happy living in, right? It's not a lot to ask for, but at the same time, it's a lot to ask for. It's very hard to get all four of these. Usually, you'll have like two at the best, right? So you have to make some compromises somewhere. I would say if you're gonna make a compromise anywhere, the compromise should be with your starting salary at the expense of those three things above it. If you get those three out of the four, fine. I would take that in a heartbeat. Um, but it's important. It's very important. Um, we just talked about most of this stuff. So now I just want to get a little bit more about one thing here because I got questions about uh, how what do I do in there's one question I got about someone who would graduate a fellowship joining a multidisciplinary orthopedic practice where he was the only spine surgeon. So you had like let's say 10 orthopedic surgeons at this place, all of them doing different things, and he was the only guy doing spine. Okay. So he said, what do you think? I think this is great. You know, I'm gonna be busy from it was billed as him being busy from day one, no shortage of cases, right? That's great. But at the same token, once they have that role filled with this individual, that person becomes the spine person. So whenever his other partners are on call and they get a spine case, guess who it's going to? It's this guy. So what happens is, you don't want to be on call all the time. You want to have predictability in your schedule. And that's very, very important because you're not a resident anymore. You're not a fellow anymore. When you were a resident fellow, you're just on call all the time, right? You just whatever the attending want to do, you're there. You snap your fingers, you show up scrubbed in, do the case, right? But when you're an attending, you don't want to have that same lifestyle. It's very, very difficult and very taxing when you are in your mid-career. That's the biggest thing. You don't want to be woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning. You want to go on vacation, not have to worry about things happening, or you just want to have a weekend where you don't have to worry about being called in because one of your partners can't do a spine case or something, right? I mean, these are these are all things that you have to think about. No one tells you about this stuff when it's on paper, right? So those are things that I think are very, very key. Another thing that's important is your opportunities for investment, partnership, and career advancement, right? What can you kind of do on your own? And can you get a consulting agreement on your own? Can you get your own, if you develop a relationship with, let's say, a pain physician, and that pain physician sends you cases, not the practice cases, sends directly to you. Can you take that patient and operate on that patient and you get the reimbursement for that? Or do you have to share it with the practice? I mean, these are all things that you should kind of be aware about. And kind of it's hard to talk about these things sometimes, but you want to bring it up. It's important because uh once you sign that contract and once you start working with that group or let's say that academic center, it's very difficult to kind of go back and change things. Like whatever you sign is what you're going to stick with. Um, and another thing that is good, especially in an academic center where you have other spine surgeons, what's your role in this group? Like, are you the MIS person? Are you the robotics person? Are you the research person? Are you the deformity person? Um, like, what's your role in that group? Are you just a general person? You just see everything that comes in, right? You want to you want to kind of have a defined role in that group as to excuse me, what your cases are going to be, the scale and scope of your cases, because when when there's call cases coming in, who are those cases going to go to, right? If it's like a small case, maybe it goes to the MIS person. If it's a big crazy thing, it goes to the deformity, complex spine surgeon. Those are things you kind of want to have defined. Another thing you want to know is how much help you're going to get. in clinic, how much autonomy you have in clinic to run things the way you want them to, and whether or not, if especially at an academic center, whether they want you to practice pain. Who's going to manage the patient's pain after surgery, or let's say who's writing pain medications for the patient. These are all things you kind of want to do. Um, okay, a little bit about this is that in this day and age, anyone who tells you don't sign anything with non-compete is like super out of touch. I've never seen, I've run the gamut of academic, private and private practices. I've yet to see a single contract that did not have a non-compete of some wording of a non-compete or restrictive covenant in it. So that's just, there's no such thing as a non-compete. Interestingly, there was legislation that was recently passed challenging this, but this is completely tied up in the courts right now, and it'll probably be a couple of years before we have more definitive things. So as it stands, the vast majority of these places have non-competes. This may be important to you, this may not be important to you, but you should know what it is, because if you're like, okay, if I'm going to leave this place, I'm just going to go to a different state or whatever, fine, then it's not important to you. But if you're like going to leave that center and go somewhere else close by, you should know, because you can run into a lot of trouble. There's not much room for negotiation in these contracts. I mean, the only thing that really could be negotiated is like maybe salary, and maybe a little bit about like little things here and there, like bonuses and stuff like that. That's about it. It's very rare unless you come with established practice, many years under your belt, and you're like well known in a certain field or a certain discipline to have the hospital make any capital purchase for you. Like if you're fresh out of fellowship, you're gonna go whatever and use whatever they have. They have a kerosene from 1992 over there. That's what you're gonna use. They have some C-arm that is like it's gasoline powered and it barely, the image is all washed out. You can't see anything. That's what you're gonna use. So it's very rare that they're gonna make a capital purchase for you. Um, unless you're like known as being like this major MIS person in robotics, and they specifically hired you for that, and they told you, hey, listen, we're gonna buy you a Mazer X, or we're gonna get you Excelsior GPS because you're that person, and we want to have this program here. We're gonna get that for you, but that's rare. Usually, fresh out of fellowship, you're not gonna get that. um, understand how you make your money. Like, is it salary? Is it you have productivity? Like, how does your bonus get factored in? Is it based on how many cases you're doing? Is it based on how many patients you see in clinic? It can have some really abstract stuff in there that you don't know about until it's too late. And you're like, oh, that bonus I was counting on, so all of a sudden don't get. Because of something random, like we expected you to see 100 patients every month or something. You only saw 98. So sorry you didn't get it. And I think most important of all is what happens if you leave? That's the biggest thing. What happens if things don't work out? What happens if you have to leave within your, let's say, 3-year contract? You have to leave within 3 years. Um, what if you don't meet your RVU requirements if you have those? Like I always think on like the things going wrong, right? You get there and like there are no cases all of a sudden. Everybody leaves. You get there, somebody quits. You get there, they hire somebody else too, and somehow they get all your cases. Like, this crazy things happen in life. And you were counting on 100 patients by the end of the year. You only got like 40. I mean, things happen, right? Another thing is, you have to be a little bit more conservative when you're in boards collection period, right? You're doing more like decompressions, not as many instrumented cases, right? So um, that cuts into the total RVUs, right? Because let's say if you let's say an average laminectomy is about 14, 15 RVUs, right? An average TLIF, for example, is like 50, 60 RVUs. So, plus minus 10, 20 RVUs, whatever. But uh, that's a major difference, right? So you want to be a little bit more conservative, obviously, when you're early in your career. That's going to cut into your total RVUs. Anyway, so the key point here is that you want to understand what happens if you don't get those targets, if you have to leave, if things don't work out as planned, because there can be and this is especially in private practices, there can be little clauses here and there that can be like life changing all of a sudden. Like if you leave within 3 years, let's say they give you a sign-on bonus, and if you leave, and it's contingent on you staying 3 years and like re-signing again, right? And if you don't, you owe them that money back or something, or you something happens bad to you, right? There's just stuff like that. You gotta be very careful. You gotta be very careful. Just be very clear about what you're signing. And these are all things I just talked about, right? Um, I would say that you want to know the main things that are going to affect you on a day-to-day basis is how you run your practice, how much help you get. Um, what's your call schedule? Do you cover a level one trauma center? I don't personally think that's a good thing. Uh, you that's on you. I like predictability in my schedule. You want to get to the point where call is more of a nuisance than something that feeds you. When we all start, we need those cases. So call is good. You want to get those cases. You want to get those cases, right? But at a certain point, you're going to reach um, milestones in your practice, and calls can become like a nuisance because your schedule is booked. You have a full clinic. You're completely maxed out OR time, and you get this case on call, right? Like, what are you going to do? When are you going to fit this in? You want to do it now? Do you want to take it tomorrow? But tomorrow you got to rearrange things around. It's like it becomes a mess. You almost don't even want to take call anymore because you're just so busy with your normal stuff that it doesn't even like help you in any way, right? So that's the goal. That's kind of where you want to get. Who's operating with you in the OR? Do you get residents? Do you get fellows? Do you have an ACP? Do you have a PA? How comfortable are they with spine? How comfortable are you doing a case from skin to skin, right? Like if you're, and that's why I kind of said about being comfortable with freehand technique, because if I would say from my experience, and I work in New York City, I work in Manhattan, I do some stuff in Brooklyn, I do some stuff in, I work in Staten Island, right? A lot of these hospitals, I've done a little, kind of moonlighting in different hospitals in Brooklyn and Queens and stuff. A lot of these hospitals I've done moonlighting in and little shifts in sometimes, they don't have any, they just have a C arm, and that's it. And that's a C arm from like 30 years ago, and that's it. And they don't have any nav. And I think if you're not comfortable with freehand technique, like I don't even know how you would work in a hospital like that. There's just no way. And I would say, and I've had so many issues with nav. Like, if anything, I would argue that most of my misplaced screws were using nav. Now, of course, I'm the type that generally freehands everything unless it's a very complicated case. Then I bring the nav in because I feel like that adds more value. And you can argue that, oh yeah, it was a complicated case, and we probably would have missed it anyway if you did freehand, right? But like, I don't really think nav adds much to a case. I really don't. And I know Ali Bodge disagrees with me on that. I don't know where he is. I don't think he's here today, but that's okay. Maybe he and I will debate this some other time. I think if you can graduate fellowship and you're comfortable with freehand technique, you are like so leaps and bounds ahead of like 90% of spine surgeons out there that you actually like people pay attention to that. That's such a good skill set to have. Wow, like this guy, he does, he can do freehand technique. That's really impressive. That's really, really impressive. You want to be comfortable with that if you can. Because you can always go back and learn how to do nav, right? But it's very difficult if you're too comfortable and relying on nav to go and do freehand on your own. You don't want to lose that skill set. Yeah, I work with so many spine surgeons who don't even know how to put in a screw if there's no nav. It's crazy. Um, so um, speaking of that, um, I got one question about should I get a contract lawyer? I think if you are joining academic practice, absolutely, there's no reason to. Those contracts at this point and in this day and age, they're literally like template, same for everybody. They don't change really much. Everybody gets the same thing. So that's like for any like major academic center, you're gonna get the same thing no matter what. Uh, if you're gonna join a private practice, then maybe because there may be more language in there that's difficult to understand, and it's more about what happens if you leave the practice or if things don't work out, and they want to get rid of you. Um, that's where like this becomes more of an issue. Um, I found that's much more helpful to just show the contract to someone that you trust, like a surgeon that you trust and can go over it and knows what to look for. Most of these lawyers, I've hired, I kind of looked into it. They don't really know what to look for, the same that one of your attendings would look for. I found it not to be particularly useful and frankly a gigantic waste of money. Um, okay, let's get to specifically, let me take a little break here. Any questions? Anything you'd like me to answer before I get into the question, just specifically some of the questions I got? I probably touched about most of these, but all right, let's keep going into it. So I got a lot of questions, and I touched upon most of these, but I kind of distill a little bit more. Which practice setup is the best? Academic versus private-demic, which is kind of a hybrid of both. Okay. Um, I would say again, it depends on you and what kind of case you want to do and where you feel yourself to be happiest. Okay. All right. So really, I'd say it's academic and private. Okay. And we'll talk about private-demic. Academic is, for all purposes, you're working at like a major educational center with an affiliated university, with medical students, with residents, there are fellows, there's active research going on in there. You're working with a big department with numerous other faculty. There's a chairman, there's distinctly, vice chairman. You have professors, associate professors, assistant professors, there's a tenure track. There's like, it's very, very clear what's expected of you. And you're in a big department. There's a big call schedule they share with all the other attendings. Everything is covered by the hospital, your malpractice, your office expenses. You're working in this place. You're working with residents primarily. This is like your standard kind of bread and butter academic practice. Um, now, all the things I mentioned are, if you notice, are the pros, right? Those are all things that if you want to do, and you're going to conferences, excuse me, you're going to conferences, you're presenting, you're mentoring residents, you're working with them. These are all pros, in my opinion. If you like that, then academic is 100% for you. Okay. You're kind of known in the spine world. Like people, you go to these conferences, you go to meetings, you're like you're presenting, you're publishing papers, people know about you, they talk about you, you're like, you're a presence in the spine world. Um, those are most of the pros. In private practice, I would say, but it comes at the expense of. I guess go back. The cons are that it comes at the expense of a lot of your own autonomy and your vision about how you want to do things. Okay, if you don't care about that, okay, if you just be like, listen, I don't care about that stuff. I just want to have everything kind of planned out for me. I just show up. My clinic is staffed and run and organized by them. I'm just gonna kind of be here, do whatever I want, right? um, then that's fine, right? But if you don't like that, you want to be able to pick who you work with. You want to run the clinic the way you want to run it. Your patients want to see you rather than they want to come and see the hospital center because a lot of these patients are like, oh, I want to go to Northwell Health and get treated. I want to go to NYU and get treated. These are all hospitals in the city, in New York City. Um, and somehow they filter their way to you, right? They think of you as a representative of that institution, right? You are a Northwell Health surgeon. You are an NYU surgeon. They don't think of you as you are Jonathan Rasouli, spine surgeon, right? You kind of lose a little bit of your autonomy that way. Um, the bigger the system, the more bureaucratic the system, the more cog in the wheel mentality, meaning like you're just like one little piece in this gigantic machine. And when that happens, you're also easily replaceable. And they focus less on you and your happiness. And it can be challenging. It can be very challenging to work in a system like this. You lose a lot of your autonomy, burnout, it becomes a big thing. Now, with private practice, you are the boss, right? I'm going to assume that you're like joining a spine practice with other attendings, not like going out on your own and starting your own private practice, which you could do, but it's the same thing. Like, okay, you are more in charge. Like, yes, you're going to fold into the model of whatever that private practice was before you got there, but you're a little bit more like in charge. They're more flexible. They can run things, change things much quicker than a academic place can. The reimbursement, the pay is usually better, but that comes with less stability, right? It's more unpredictable about how your paycheck is going to be. One person, one of my good friends, who's a neurosurgeon in private practice, he likened it to, these academic centers are these like big behemoth battleships, and the private practice are these little like pirate ships. They're much more maneuverable. They're much more flexible. They can adapt. They can change much more quick than these big, academic battleships. And that's a good analogy because like you can be much more flexible. You change things like on the whim. The problem is that in this day and age, we live now, and this is very real. We live now in an era where reimbursement for the same things that we do every day is getting cut more and more and more and more and more every single year. They're looking to pay less for the same surgeries that we do, right? There has not been really, as far as I'm concerned, there's been virtually zero innovation in spine surgery for over 10 years. There's nothing new about what we do. There's just little variations. All we have done is make our surgeries more expensive, and we're getting reimbursed less. The outcomes are no different, and it's not good for the health of our practice because now there's so much attention to length of stay, to readmission within 30, 90 days. There's so much attention to surgical site infections, complications, how your outcomes are coming than ever before. Like these things, they didn't really look at it too much. Now they're like honing in on these things now. And especially in our world, it's very tough because a lot of these surgeries, like let's say you do a big, big whack, right? This research shows that like these patients tend to do better at like 1 year, right? Assuming they have no complications, right? Like in the best hands, the complication rate after a T10 of pelvis or T4 to ilium, whatever, it's virtually 100%. There's gonna be some little thing, UTI, PE, or some little thing, right? Not like a catastrophic complication, but there's gonna be some little thing, right? Uh, People are looking at this like, what is this? What's going on? Like, why are these surgeries costing so much money? And these patients are requiring 15 revisions. Like, what are we doing, right? So there's a lot of attention to this stuff now. We're not living in a good era of spine surgery. It's just going to keep getting harder and harder and harder until we have something real innovation. Now, Pavademic, we have pros and cons of Pavademic. I would say I used to be very fascinated with this model because it seemed like you would get the best of both worlds, right? So like, okay, you're not quite academic, but you're not quite private, right? So it's like kind of it's a kind of like a sheltered private practice, right? Like you would think that you have all the flexibility of a private practice, but you get a lot of the benefit, but with the benefits and protection of academic, right? It's usually what it is, but it's not really like that. In reality, it's more of like you get all the cons of, of both combined. So I would say Privatemic is, and this is all my opinion, by the way, Privatemic is probably not the best one. And then I really try to focus more on a pure model, meaning like academic and private. One of those two will probably be the best. And you really want to kind of have a pure model of what that's going to be. A lot of questions on finances. Interestingly enough, I didn't really talk too much about that in my last talk. I didn't really talk too much about it now. And I think that's a topic of a separate talk altogether, like how to manage your finances after you become an attending, because things will change for you, ideally for the better, right? But you are, you've been in training for a very, very long time, and now you're suddenly you're making more money, and and how do you invest this money, right? What do you do? I was 7 years in neurosurgery residency. I never had a 401k. They never gave us any of this stuff, right? So no one ever taught us about any of this stuff. So all of a sudden you come out, wait, what? Like a traditional IRA? What is that? Like, where's my money going? Like, oh my God, I paid that much in tax? It's crazy, right? These are all things I never thought about until I graduated, and nobody was there to tell me any of this stuff. So because money is a little bit of a touchy subject, it's very difficult to talk to people about money, and I mean, it always is, right? But like these are, I would say, like, again, this would probably be another talk of mine, is how to manage your finances. There are many resources out there, like White Coat Investor, Doximity, Reddit. I follow all of these. I like to read these things. I like to learn about this stuff. To me, it's fascinating because it's like I learned 0.0 about this in medical school and residency and fellowship. And nobody really talked to me about this stuff ever. I kind of had to learn on my own. But I would say, as a general rule, and we can talk about this, and this is way beyond the scope of this talk. Your general rule is you want to maximize if a 401k or if 403b is the same thing. If it's provided by the healthcare system you work with, you want to maximize your contribution stats, about 20 something thousand dollars a year. And you want those to be managed in a passive index fund, meaning like something tracking the S&P 500 or NASDAQ. You don't want to get anything too esoteric with that. An HSA or a health savings account is a good idea if you have a high deductible health plan. What is a high deductible health plan? If you're generally healthy and you have like, again, let's say you work for like a big healthcare system, there's gonna be 50 different health plans. Like, which one do you pick? So if you're like generally healthy and you don't have too many doctor's visits and like you don't take any medications, then you don't want to pay too much money for things you're not going to use, right? So that plan is basically like the cheapest plan, and that's called a high deductible health plan. And what you do instead is they open up something called a health savings account for you, and that's it's a government sponsored account where you take pre-tax money that goes into that account. It grows tax free for the rest of your life, and then at a certain point, if you have healthcare related expenses, you can take that money out tax free. Okay, so it's actually nice. So it's triple tax free, pre-tax money, growing tax free. You take it out tax free. It's great, right? And you can take it out anytime you want for a healthcare expense. After the age of 65, then you can use it as retirement, and then it gets taxed, unfortunately. But what you use it for healthcare expenses is very like it can be anything really. So it's actually pretty good. So that's something you should definitely look into if you have that kind of a healthcare plan. My general recommendation, again, I got some questions about what should I do about my loans? Should I just do like the smallest thing? My opinion is, and this is just purely my opinion, is you want to pay those because we're paying interest now, right? For a good period of time there, when COVID hit, those loans were just sitting there, not gathering any interest, right? But now my interest rate was 6.8% back when I took loans in 2000. When was that? I took it for med school, right? So back in 2007, 2008, the interest rate I was paying was 6.8%, right? I'm not sure what it is now, but I think it's not good given the current interest rates out there. You want to try to pay this down as fast as possible. So like set money aside, don't just pay the minimum amount because that money is going to grow with interest and compound over time. You want to pay that aggressively as possible. So like the first couple of years out of attendingship, you just want to kind of get a debt free, get some savings, and then grow from there. Because then every paycheck that comes into your account, that money stays with you, it doesn't go out. And if you have credit card debt or you have living expenses, things like that, pay those off even more aggressively. So it's very, very key. Should I do a second fellowship at MIS in deformity? So like you do a deformity fellowship, but you got no MIS experience you want to experience. I would say in general, no, I wouldn't do that because you got to think about your opportunity cost because now you've been in school for a long or training for a long time, right? And like what like you're gonna do another fellowship that may be very observational, you just stand there and watch. Like I don't really think that's really gonna be very helpful for you. Like if you really want to get that experience, you can do a bunch of cadaver labs with a company. Let's say you work with Stryker, for example. Excuse me. You can get like the you can get the reps they work with to set up a cadaver lab or multiple cadaver labs where you can do like one-to-one peer mentorship where they can like show you, okay, this is how you put a tube in. This is how you use an endoscope. This is how you use the robot. And you just keep using it, doing it over and over and over again until you get comfortable. And they can even have the surgeon come in with you in the OR to do that, right? Because what's most of these cases are or have like a partner, do a bunch of cases with a partner, see how they do this. That's more, I think that's more helpful and better when you're attending than anything you get as a fellow. A lot of these fellowships now are very observational. You're just standing there watching and attending. I personally don't get anything out of that. So Again, I think opportunity cost is not really there. It's not in favor of doing this unless you're so like, okay, listen, I'm not comfortable. I just have to get that exposure. Then yeah, maybe do one more fellowship. I personally don't think it's worth it. Okay, any questions? All right. So, what should I do about spine consultancy? All right. If you are offered a consultancy or a consultantship, that's better phrase, with a spine company, um, if you work for private practice, then not a big deal. You do whatever you want. If you work for an academic center, you have to state this, and you have to they look at this pretty closely these days. They can penalize you if you don't talk about it. They look at whatever is published. Literally, you can go on openpayments.org. Like it's all there. Like every dinner you go to, every like talk you give, and you get paid, it gets published on this website, and that number is like there for anyone to see. Openpayments.org, right? Any spine surgeon, you just type in their name. It says what companies, what's going on. Um, all that stuff is published freely, and it's looked at more these days. It's not it's not necessarily like they're not going to definitely penalize you or anything bad will happen, but they can start asking some questions if you don't state these things. So you're gonna have to talk about it. Sometimes they may block you. They may say no, you can't do that. For XYZ reasons. So just something to think about. There's always a risk and benefit to doing anything, and I think our again there ha in order for this field to move forward in a healthy way, it's a inexorable relationship between um, surgeon and spine companies. We work together to make the product and the field better, right? So, and I think that that is a good balance, and it's an important balance. And with that, uh, that those lines need to be distinct though, and when they start getting blurred, that's when they can run into trouble. And these can all be things that can cause you headaches if you're not careful. All right. Any questions? All right. Remember, you can feel free to you can just direct message me, email me anytime. If you have any questions at all. I know it may be difficult to publish them publicly here, but if you have any questions, you want to talk to me offline, I'm more than happy to answer, more than happy to take them and answer them. Um, I wish you all the best of luck, and this will be published online as well too. So you can always watch this and see this as well too. So I thank you all for joining me here tonight. And we're gonna have another episode of Virtual Global Spine next week. And I hope you all have a great rest of your week. And if there are no questions, I guess we can stop a little bit early. Have a great night.